All right, so hello everybody. Today we are going to talk about identifying, integrating, and managing OT risks. So just to give you an idea, I work for Accenture. I work in industrial cybersecurity consulting. A lot of what I do is industrial control system, but today I'm going to talk more about operational technology. So my first question is, by a show of hands, how many of you have used operational technology today? Anybody? I've seen an hand raising and coming down. All right, so we're going to talk about what it is. Operational technology is defined by Gartner as being hardware and software that through direct monitoring and or control will directly affect direct industrial equipment, assets, process, and events. I have a little issue with this. Industrial equipment is not all industrial equipment. There are more than that to OT. So if we look at the applications of operational technology in our life, it used to be what you're seeing on this side of a screen. It used to be this industrial thing. Tanks, valves, PLCs, things like that. All industrial. When you produce a product, generate electricity or things. Now, what is happening is, since quite a few years, you've got occupancy functions coming up. And if you look at the looming, well, the existing energy crisis, you're going to see more and more building automation, building management systems. And these are OT systems, okay? They are controlling things, controlling the physical world around you in the space you're working in this environment here. And we don't really pay attention to them until we have issues with them. So to give you an idea, these are examples of when you use OT. You use OT all the day long. The answer to the question is all the time. If you need energy, if you need wastewater, if you need water, you are going to use OT. Now, how often have you thought about this in your work life, in your work environment? If you're in charge of IT security of a video game industry company, you still have an office running, and that office needs air conditioning. It needs airflow for the safety of people. It needs lifts. And that is something that is important to protect as well. What are the key elements of OT? Well, they are, for the most part, things that you are used to knowing about, routers, things like that, but they are going to take different shapes. For example, the black boxes with the green little connectors, that's a computer, network gateway, sensors, things like that. They are connected to your regular network. The only difference is they are DIN rail mounted, meaning that they are mounted in circuit breaker cabinets. So what I'm saying is you have some important part of your IT, or what we call OT, lying in cabinets that you may not have thought about. The other thing is that they can be a bit exotic. If you look at the sensor in red there, it's a temperature sensor with an antenna, meaning it's wireless, not Wi-Fi, wireless. OT will use mediums for communicating that you may not be used to. It will use protocols that are often unencrypted and unauthenticated. And those are primed for any kind of abuse. And that abuse will reflect in your real physical world around you or whatever you produce. It's also usually very time sensitive. OT is designed to react to things happening, things it's monitoring. So if you don't pay attention to the timing, that's a problem. But if you start scanning while it's trying to do something, you might slow it down and cause problem. So that's why also you need to be careful about what you do with it. Now, if we look at OT versus IT, I said some elements are actually like IT. There are. Yes, you can patch a lot of OT systems. But should you? Often you will find that people will tell you, no, I don't want to patch. There are reasons for that. For example, we are in a room here, a lot of people. We need airflow. We need to make sure it's cool enough. Now is not the time to do anything with the OT system that would stop that airflow. So you might have to delay it, or you might not be it may not be possible because you're in some kind of production cycle or some deadline you have. The other thing is, OT always follows a need for form factor, fit, and function. Changing an equipment in OT might mean that you need to change more than that because it has a spatial size for an equipment. It fits exactly in there. And if you change your equipment, you're not going to have the same size. It's going to be deeper. The cables are not going to go. There's going to be all kinds of problems. So you always need to really look at all those things. And then the most important part is the priorities. If you are familiar with the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, availability, well, we're going to reuse that, but differently. First of all, because it's OT, because it moves things, because it's taking care of the air in this room, because of all these things, safety is first. You always consider safety first, and you have to consider it during an incident as well. You have to consider availability second. If you're talking about access to a building or things like that, what is more important? Like, do you still need to let people out? Do you still need to let them in? What is going on? Integrity. Integrity of data is important because it could mean the difference between a lift stopping at a certain level or a product that is now not within the range of quality and safety you would need for example, for a child to play with. The last thing is confidentiality. Confidentiality is important because obviously anything confidential you want to keep. But if you think of producing drugs or blueprints for a product, or you're mailing information for tax purposes or for children education, you want that to remain confidential. And if you have like anything like a recipe, by the way, OT will have both the recipe and the know-how of how making your product. So anyone who gets into your OT and understands what's in there, all they have to do is just rebuild exactly what you've built. It's also a proven vector of attack. So when I say that there's a lot of attacks, it's on the rise. There's a really cool website called showdown.io. This is actually a Lithuanian PLC that was in there last week. Pretty easy to do. You just go to showdown.io, you type PLC, and then you say you want in Lithuania. You got it. So if you think you have some OT and you don't know, go to showdown.io, please, and check. Also, people who abuse the criminals, they are going to go there. Okay, so don't let them go there. The other thing is, it has been used to, OT has been used to attack IT. So one of the very most known issue was Target, a retail shop in the US, same as Remy. What happened is their HVAC maintenance company got hacked, and through there they got into the point of sales, and through there they stole 40 million credit cards. And that's because they didn't have to go through the front door. They went through the back door. Okay, so how do we deal with OT event management? Well, the first thing is, if you did not think you used OT today, I would suggest that the first thing is you find out who's taking care of the possible OT you have in your buildings. First thing is talk to the people in charge of a facility, person in charge of a maintenance. They will know who you have to talk to. They will be the people who understand what is going on, and they will know the third party that have access to your systems. Okay? You will always have third party, by the way, accessing your system remotely or locally with USB keys. Then you need to find your OT assets. It's like gray IT, but even worse. Some of the OT systems are embedded. You may not physically see them. They might be behind like some big box that does something. So you need really to find them. Then the next thing is understand the exposure. It's like any risk. You want to know what the real risk is. And the way you know the real risk is you speak to the people who are running these things, and you understand, okay, if this breaks, what else breaks in the company? If I cannot get access to something, what happens? Or if someone finds out what the accesses are within the building, will that enable them to better social engineer or do something else? You got to understand those things. The next thing is, you're looking at the requirements to address an OT event. When you want to plan for your event management, you really need to understand if your control is worse than the attack. If, for example, you're running a hotel, you've got 3 lifts, and you have a major security event on whatever controls the lift, you might want to make sure that you have people that can come down through the stairs. If you have anyone stuck upstairs and they have reduced mobility, that's a problem. So every time you need to really look at what is the impact in the real world of putting a control. The next thing is, what are the legal and contractual impacts? For example, here, if they wanted to work on the air conditioning, the airflow, and all that, that could mean canceling this presentation, which in turn would turn into a problem with the organizers because they paid to be here. So you want to understand what you do there. And finally, you want to understand the IT impact. Can something in the OT go to my IT? Typical issue is a maintenance guy coming in with a USB key, plugging it in to do some maintenance. A very, very common occurrence. The problem is if you don't have something separating your IT, or if you don't have the right controls in place for an incident, it might propagate. The next thing is know the deciders. Who will make a decision and to what level can they decide? So if you go really in the industrial, like energy distribution, you start looking at, well, cutting this part of the electrical network is okay, but once we go bigger, we need to have someone higher up because more people are impacted and we need to take more precautions around it. Same thing in the workplace. It may not be always the same person. So once you've done that, you start looking at integrating with a SOC. And sometimes you hear talking about OT SOCs. In my experience, it's not very common. It's actually, it would be quite a lot of resources for little return on most companies. So usually we say, okay, just integrate with your regular IT SOC. There are some other advantages I'm going to talk about later. And then you need to adapt your tools and procedures. So now you need to look at, okay, what do I need to do so the right people are in the loop, the people in charge of OT, the maintenance people. And regarding adding OT-specific tools, unless you have a fully zero trust install, but I have some issue with that because people with USB keys walking around could create issues as well. Unless you have that, I would strongly suggest a firewall, at least between your IT and OT if you can. And then for the other tools, it really depends on how much OT or industrial control system you have. May not always be worth it. But at least try and make sure you detect anything new or understand what's going on there as much as you can. Now, if we start looking at certifications, a question I got recently was, should we use ISO 27000 or IEC 62443? So I'm guessing maybe a lot of people don't know what IEC 62443 is. IEC 62443 is a standard that is developed for operational technology and industrial control system. That's its focus. It is really good for that. It's got, like, I think it's the first 2 parts that are focused on systems, like what you deploy in a company. And the beauty of it is it also has parts that are focused on the manufacturer of the products and solution, the hardware and the software. And what it does is that it forces these companies to keep systems secure through their life cycle. secure development lifecycle, okay? That means that contrary to before where they would produce some equipment and then disband the development team and move on, what they are now saying is, well, actually you need to keep it running for all the time it's going to be alive. Now OT systems tend to be 10 to 20 years, even sometimes more. So if you think of all the IT systems you have that have lasted that long, you really have to really concentrate on that. And that's why IEC 62443 is good for stuff you buy and also to deploy. But now ISO 27K is very important because in most businesses, you're going to be asked, do you have ISO 27K? If not, I will not make business with you. And it's not a problem because actually ISO 27K has good information system management rules. It's really good for when you're setting up how you handle your risk, your events and all that. So you can leverage that. You can use that beside your IEC 62443. Okay? So this is really like the best you can do. Alternatively, you might have heard of NIST with a T. That's the American way of doing OT security. It's good, but in my opinion, it does not have that manufacturer secure development lifecycle part to it. And that's why I would prefer 62443. All right, so what are the key takeaways? Key takeaways is you really need to understand where do you have OT in your system and who's the person responsible for that. These people are going to be really important because they're the only people who can help you identify systems. The next thing is they're going to help you identify what you can do with the systems. What are the risks you have? How do you qualify your risks? And how you want to handle them. And then you can plan for your possible adverse safety and security impact of incident response. So when you're doing your plan, you really need to talk to them and say, okay, well, if I do that, if I isolate that system, what is breaking? Is it breaking in a dangerous way or not? Once you have done that, the other thing is you need to consider your GDPR and intellectual property exposure. As I said before, OT will contain a lot of information on what you're doing, why you're doing it. You could have even like things like if you're printing letters, that physical paper is GDPR possible issues. So you need to also consider, well, if I stop printing, am I disposing of the material that's half printed or not? What do I do with it? And then you can finally adapt your SOC processes and include the OT processes. All right, so I'm trying to get some time. This is all I had. Thank you, everybody.